Welcome. So, my name is Clayton Vance. I'm a licensed architect, and this is The Timeless Home. Why are we doing this? This is the first video in a series that we're going to continue to do. I want to answer the most common questions that I've got over the last 20 years of doing this. And the best way to start that is to just lay out the groundwork, which we're going to essentially go through this experience together and answer your questions. So I figure let's start with the question. The number one adjective that you have come to me with when you're searching for an architect or someone to design your home, especially when someone comes to me, is there's pretty much one word, and I bet you can guess what it is since the whole channel is named after it. It's timeless. What's interesting about the word timeless, that infers that it's anti-trend. And so we're concerned more about having longevity than we are about following trends. So if you're that type of person, I love where you're coming from with that, because that means you're more concerned about the future. It's the whole adage of plant trees right now, today. When's the best time to plant a tree? 10 years ago. When's a better time? 30 years ago. Well, when's the best time to plant a tree now? Just right now. And you're willing to plant trees that you know you'll never sit under, in whose shade you'll never sit under. And that's what timelessness is about, is providing long-term value for generations. And I think there's a growing concern for that, because we have lived through the last 100 years where it took architectural styles roughly 200, 300, 400 years to really shift at any given time. And then with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, modernism, steel, construction, and all that, and a totally different aesthetic, a rejection of kind of traditional academies, and hey, here's the new way to do stuff. And we can talk about the Beaux-Arts Academy in time and what that, not the Beaux-Arts Academy, but the Beaux-Arts Academy and the Bauhaus, one in France, one in Germany, how they were different and how that led to the world in which we live right now. But before that, let's just go through some of the general concepts of timeless. Have you ever wandered down a street, walked down a street, gone on vacation, and something just felt right? Where everything about the space, if it was a tree-lined street, the width of the sidewalk, the planter bed, the architecture that actually made up the street wall, the width of the street, the cars, what about it made it so appealing to just walk down? There was just a space that was pleasant to walk down. You're like, wow, this is the word. What's the word? Charming. That's the other word everyone uses. This is charming. And I want to talk about these three words that we use all of the time, that I hear all of the time, that we're essentially trying to describe the one, which is beautiful. Because we've come to accept the idea or the fact that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Is it really? We're going to talk about that. What we're trying to say when we say, I want something timeless, we want that enduring visual quality or enduring quality of the thing we're trying to produce. But really what we're saying is, I want something that's beautiful. Because what we've seen over the last 100 years is there was different style in the 1940s. Anything after 1930, all of a sudden, 1940s was different than the 50s, was different than the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems that every single 2 to 3 years, styles change, and you just can't keep up. And when you're dealing with architecture, I mean, holy cow, try to keep up with the Joneses when you're dealing with architecture. That is an expensive proposition, to have to remodel your house over and over and over again, just to keep up with the trends. Let me tell you a few things that I've discovered as I've done a lot of remodels with my time, and we remodeled stuff from the historic early 1900s all the way to just 10 years ago. And so I've broken apart walls in the 50s, broken apart walls from the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s, and even looked at the stuff and broken apart walls from the early 1900s. And And when you're in Europe and you're dealing with those types of things, that's a totally different story because the construction types and everything are different. But I'm going to focus on what my scope of work has been within the U.S. And so you begin to see the construction changes, the construction differences, the aesthetic taste, the aesthetic preferences over any given time. And when we're dealing with homes that don't have a style, meaning I've got a whole bunch of homes behind me. These are all historic homes prior to 1920 that were built prior to 1920. You can look at any of these things, and there's commonalities with all of them. All of them have 4 similar principles, which we'll go over. One of the things that happened in the 1920s that you start dealing with, that you discover, is that prior to the 1920s, we didn't really have engineered materials. Things started being introduced with additional metals and plastics and all that type of stuff, and now all of our buildings are foam. Everything seems fake. We've lost the level of authenticity, and I think all of us are really, when we're saying I want something timeless, we're striving for that level of authenticity that we want to grasp something real. That's why nature is so important. And when all of these were built, they were just using natural materials. They were using materials that were extracted from nature, they were sculpted from nature, put in a building and ordered, and then when they decompose and decay and the buildings get run down, I mean, what's more romantic than walking through a ruined castle in Scotland or Italy? It's absolutely amazing, and you just think, who lived here? What was it like? Why is this so amazing? It's like the rise and fall of civilizations, and we all participate in that story on a daily basis, unaware or very aware. What my goal with this entire channel is, and what we're trying to do, is make sure that you, as you engage in your environment, you're no longer a passive observer. You're a conscious observer, you're an active observer, and as you do that and begin to engage in that, what we can do is we can begin to demand higher quality from our builders, our subcontractors, our designers, and our fabricators, because that's the thing that's missing right now, is there's a big giant knowledge gap with all of those groups of people with what makes truly timeless cities, homes, rooms, architecture, whatever. What makes timeless stuff, and what's the trendy stuff that we just keep recycling, and what is something that is really stylistically authentic or completely astylistic, or maybe has no style, that we just want to tear down and rebuild over and over and over again. Do you realize that our architecture and the buildings that we put up now are meant to only last 30 to 40 years? It's essentially the life of the loan, and then just the value's gone, tear it down, blah, blah, blah. And so what's interesting is we think of real estate as our most valuable asset, right? And the only value in it really is the appreciation value that it possesses. And so you need to begin to think about architecture, real estate, your homes. Is this a real estate investment, or is this a work of art? Is it truly contributing to the overall community? And is the sum greater than the parts? How does that phrase go? Someone help me out here. Is the whole greater than the sum of the parts? That's what I'm trying to say. Got off that one on the wrong foot, didn't I? So all of these that you'll see in this particular thing are part of a street or a community that, because collectively they all participate in a similar language or style, meaning traditional, the value of this home is greater because of this home and this home that sit next to it. And as we do that with ourselves and our neighbors and our communities, the overall value of any neighborhood can continue to increase. The value of what we do, and it's not just monetarily. One of the things I like to say is that the value of a home is not just in the sticks and bricks. It's in your living experience. And the living experience includes the stuff that you have when you're in the home, the culture that is produced because of the layout and functional spaces within the home actually influences what you do culturally. And then you have your neighbors, and those neighbors have neighbors. And then it spreads out into the overall community. And do you know your neighbors, and what's the value of that? And when you're walking by your neighbors' houses, you're like, wow, that is just absolutely beautiful. I love what they did. I love that. Let me tell you something. It's very interesting when you're called to do one of these remodels. The historic stuff, the reality is we don't really remodel it. Sometimes we do. We'll take it down to the natural wood, and then and it just kills me when we have to take off the original lath and plaster. We'll talk about that some other time also, but oh, that's such fantastic material. And then what we'll do is we'll often just add additions or repurpose the existing spaces, and we'll like refinish the exterior, especially if it has great details and it's been made of natural materials. We'll refinish it and then we'll do additions. But we typically don't just tear down or completely reconfigure historical stuff, because what's already there is just so much richer and has more character than what we could generally produce right now. So when we get past the 30s and we start doing remodels on 40s, 50s, and 60s, an interesting thing with the homes in the 50s is there's still that mid-century modern style. It really is a style, and the early architects of that did a fantastic job. They're super cool. My grandparents' house was a mid-century modern house, and that was kind of what I grew up in when we went to family events at my grandparents' house. But I grew up in standard split-level houses, which were the 70s, 80s houses, the standard split level, where you took the house and did that with it, and then you had a half story of stairs going up and down both ways. And it was very functional for families because kids couldn't fall down the steps very far. And that was back in the day when all of our parents were actually still having a lot of kids, and we had many siblings, and we could fight and push them down the stairs and no one would have to go to the hospital. So anyway, what's interesting with those homes, however, once you get past the 30s, when we're doing remodels, is that we redo everything, not just like additions. It's like, ooh, you know what, this doesn't actually have a style, it's not a style, and it's kind of ugly. And so what do we do with it? We reconfigure all the windows, we reconfigure how the roof lines are working, what the garages look like. We push, pull, modify, move, just to give it some character, because there isn't character in strictly functional stuff. Form should follow purpose, not just function. And I'm sure you've heard that phrase before, form follows function. Well, what we want to do, timelessness is not embedded in that idea that form follows function. That's not a thing. Timelessness is embedded in form follows purpose. Purpose, when we look at that, let's think about a door. And this is how we'll finish this introductory session. A door to an outhouse is going to be very different than a door to, say, a cathedral. Both of them are doors. The function of the door is to separate one space from another space. But the purpose of that door is very different, because what's inside the cathedral door? A house of worship. What's inside the outhouse? Some would also say a house of worship, but it's worshiping a totally different thing. So it's a different level of decor, a different level of detail of what we want to do. And I'll tell you what, if you've ever been in a place where the bathroom doors look exactly the same as the doors that go into the chapel, or the doors that go into the more decorated, more onerous room, city hall or whatever, and they're all the same door, you get really confused, especially if it's a hallway of doors and you have no idea where you're going. And so architecture actually does influence how we relate to the world, how we proceed through the world, and it is critical to make sure that we design things in a way that don't heighten our stress, but reduce our stress just by nature of their design. So as we go through this, I'll see you in the next video, where we will continue to talk about the 4 principles that are at the fundamental baseline of what makes timeless architecture, where all things have these 4 in common. And that's where we'll start next time. Thanks for joining.